If you press this thing and you truly want a war, we Russians are prepared for it, and we're
Yes.
prepared to destroy you. Unseriously, very seriously. If you talk to the soldiers on the ground who are rotating in and out of Ukraine, the Russians, my sources tell me not only is their morale very high, but they're very well informed. They understand exactly what is happening, and they are making it clear to anyone who asks them that they're preparing for war against Europe. Every Russian soldier that you talk to says the same thing. We are preparing for war with Europe. No chance of winning, and puts everything at risk in their countries. That seems to be the case in Germany, for instance. If they're willing to borrow endlessly, putting themselves deeper and deeper into debt, you add these numbers up, and now you're looking at more than 1 million men mobilized, ready to fight. Russia is getting ready. And as a result, until those things change, the Russians are going to have to assume the worst, and that's what they're doing.
The Guardian is reporting of speeches on the floor of the Russian Duma this morning, Tuesday, December 30th, beginning the process of reclassifying. And from what you've told me, the wording means a lot to the Russian people and to the military. Reclassifying this from a special military operation to an all-out war.
Yes. You'll remember a few days ago that President Putin made some remarks at a press conference. And these remarks were very straightforward. It was a warning to our European allies in NATO. If you press this thing and you truly want a war, we Russians are prepared for it, and we're prepared to destroy you. Now, the Russians have done a number of things. I was amused yesterday. There was an announcement of another 135,000 draftees. Russia has a selective draft that are moving into the force. But what's much more important is that somewheres between 650 and 750,000 reservists have been called up. Of that number, it's expected that 3, maybe 400,000, somewhere in that range, will be retained on active duty after this initial mobilization. You have on the ground in Ukraine, 750 to 800,000. You add these numbers up, and now you're looking at more than 1 million men mobilized, ready to fight. And you have them organized along multiple axes, from Kherson all the way up to the border with White Russia or Belarus. Russia is getting ready. They're taking the statements that may have been made unseriously, very seriously. If you talk to the soldiers on the ground who are rotating in and out of Ukraine, the Russians, my sources tell me not only is their morale very high, but they're very well informed. They understand exactly what is happening, and they are making it clear to anyone who asks them that they're preparing for war against Europe. That needs to be understood. Doesn't matter that the British people, the German people, the French people have said, no, thank you very much. The fact is their leaders continue to talk stupidly about engaging in a war they have no chance of winning, and puts everything at risk in their countries. And the Russians understand that. They're prepared for it, down to the lowest level. Every Russian soldier that you talk to says the same thing. We are preparing for war with Europe. Ukraine is not a sideshow, but it now shrinks to insignificance next to the larger fight for the very existence of Russia.
Well, how reckless is NATO, and how much longer can it survive without vast amounts of American support?
Well, this is a good question. When we say vast amounts of American support, what's really critical to them is the command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. That's very important. Their industries obviously are stretched to produce munitions and rockets and missiles for their weapon systems. But they are capable, if they're willing to devote themselves to the prospect, and that seems to be the case in Germany, for instance, if they're willing to borrow endlessly, putting themselves deeper and deeper into debt, operating with very fragile economies as much as we are, they're pretty powerful. But keep in mind, regardless of what President Trump says, we continue to do everything we possibly can in support of this operation. Now, we're not sending as much money as we did. Most of the equipment that we've promised won't show up for years. But the point is, today, what is happening right now, whatever we've got, we've given, whatever intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance data we can provide for targeting and attacks, we give. Those things have not changed. I don't see that ending unless President Trump gets personally involved, and I don't think he has. I mean, quite frankly, it's astonishing to me that this man Radcliffe is still running the CIA. The CIA seems to be a rogue organization that does pretty much what it wants anywhere it goes, regardless of what the president says, and that's huge.
Of what value is NATO anymore?
Well, listen, NATO should have gone away back in the early 90s, Judge. As soon as the Soviet state system collapsed, the Warsaw Pact was dissolved, Soviet forces were pulled out of East Germany, and that was the big concentration that actually posed the greatest threat to the West, was the group of Soviet forces in Germany. Once those things happened, once Poland was evacuated, and Poland was always critical as a logistical infrastructure for any offensive operations the Soviets wanted to undertake, it was over. We should have taken the opportunity then and there to begin reducing our commitments to NATO, not in the sense that we're going to abandon Europe altogether, but recognize the criticality of making the Europeans take responsibility for themselves. President Trump always understood that. He made that very clear in 2020. He understood the criticality of making the Europeans assume responsibility as their own first responders. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened largely because no one cared what President Trump said or thought. In other words, the war machine, backed by the various intelligence agencies and the Congress, continue to move in the same direction as it always has. And anything you hear from Congress demonstrates conclusively. I listened to the commander of Indo-PACOM, whatever the hell that is. I mean, what an abortion, as though we control the Indian Ocean and India. It's absurd. But nevertheless, he came in there, and listening to this man, you would have thought it was 1989. I mean, the thinking has not changed. The machinery, the bureaucracy in Washington has not changed. I think you have a similar phenomenon in Britain, France, Germany, and sadly in Poland. And as a result, until those things change, the Russians are going to have to assume the worst, and that's what they're doing.